They thought they could mess with the stranger. What they didn't know, he was Chuck Norris. And by the time they realized who they were dealing with, it was already too late. The gang of loudmouth rockers wanted to stir up trouble, but within a minute, they regretted everything. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments. Let's see where you're watching from. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a lonely, cracked ribbon of asphalt slicing through the heart of the American nowhere. The sun had long dipped beneath the horizon, leaving behind a sky painted in deep purples and navy blues. A few stars started blinking into view, but the earth below stayed quiet, except for the distant hum of a truck engine far down the road. Behind the wheel of a dusty, battle-worn pickup sat Chuck Norris. Hands firm on the wheel, eyes locked forward. The night seemed calm, but Chuck knew better. Peace was usually just the calm before something tried you. And tonight felt like one of those nights. The radio played softly, some slow, old-school country ballad. The kind that talks about long roads and things better left in the rear view. Chuck didn't focus on the words. He just felt the road. Midnight had come and gone, and after hours of driving, he figured a quick stop wouldn't hurt. That's when he saw it, a flickering neon sign glowing in the dark like a lighthouse for the lost. Big AL's Roadhouse. The only sign of life for miles. He eased off the gas and pulled into the gravel lot. A few rusty pickups, a semi-truck, and a row of motorcycles. The sight of the bikes gave him a brief pause, but only brief. He'd been in worse places. The air was thick with dust and the promise of rain. He stretched his legs, glanced at the clouds creeping in from the west, then headed inside. The bar was everything you'd expect: worn-down wood, dim lights, and the thick smell of beer, grilled meat, and cigarette smoke. The kind of place where the jukebox is always a little too quiet, and everyone inside has a story they're trying to forget. A few locals played pool. A tired old trucker sat nursing his whiskey. But in the far corner, the rockers. Worn leather jackets. Loud voices. Empty bottles. And that swagger, the kind that says, "This is our place." But they weren't bikers. Not the kind with loyalty or rules. These were a different breed, loud, sloppy, and always one wrong look away from starting something. Chuck ignored them. Walked to the bar. Took a seat. "Coffee," he said. Just that. The bartender gave him a look, sizing him up, then poured the drink. Chuck didn't say another word. He didn't need to. Years of experience had taught him that trouble doesn't just show up, it announces itself. And tonight, it was coming straight from that corner table. He could feel their eyes. The smirks. The whispered jokes. But what they didn't realize was who they were staring at. The laughter behind him didn't need a translation. Chuck knew exactly what was going on. They were sizing him up, testing the waters, waiting to see if the quiet stranger at the bar was as harmless as he looked. He took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the heat roll through him. He wasn't here to start trouble, but experience had taught him that he rarely got to make that call. The energy in the bar shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable. Like the air got heavier. A silent challenge started to build, quiet but undeniable, stretching between Chuck and the men in the corner. He stayed still, fingers wrapped around his coffee cup, eyes drifting, focused on nothing but listening. Watching. People give themselves away before they act. Chuck had seen it 1,000 times, the slight change in posture, the shift in voice, a pause too long. And tonight, the signs were loud and clear. The rockers in the far corner were getting restless. Not openly aggressive, not yet, but their vibe had changed the second Chuck walked through the door. He could feel their eyes crawling up his back. Hear their tone shift. Quiet snickers. Mumbled jokes. They weren't bikers. They were a different kind of loud, used to being the biggest dogs in small rooms. The bartender slid the coffee in front of Chuck, wiped his hands on a rag, then leaned in just a bit. "You sure you want to be here?" Chuck lifted the cup, took a calm sip, then replied without looking up. "Just passing through." The bartender glanced over Chuck's shoulder, then back at him. "Might want to keep it that way." Chuck didn't answer. He didn't have to. Behind him, a chair scraped. Slow, heavy boots echoed across the old wooden floor. Deliberate. Measured. The first approach had begun. Chuck didn't turn. He just waited. A large man stopped a few feet behind him, just close enough for Chuck to smell the stale blend of beer and smoke soaked into his clothes. The silence between them stretched thin. "You lost, old man?" the voice finally asked. Chuck slowly set his cup down and turned his head, just enough to see him. Tall. Thick-shouldered. Strong, once, now softened by too many easy wins and too many nights at bars like this. A worn leather jacket hung from his frame, the faded logo of some forgotten band on the back. He smirked, but it wasn't friendly. "Just testing." Chuck held his stare for a moment, then looked back at his cup. "No." One word. Calm. Dismissive. And that was enough. A second man joined the first, younger, leaner, cockier. He slid in closer, too close, leaning on the bar like he owned the place. "That's so," he said, his grin widening. "Thing is, this ain't really the kind of spot for." He trailed off, giving Chuck a slow, obvious once-over. Chuck didn't need to hear the rest. He already knew how that sentence ended. But before the young one could finish, a voice from the back cut through the tension like a blade. "That's enough." It wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Finality. Both men paused, glancing back. And just like that, they stepped aside. Chuck turned, finally getting a good look at the man who'd spoken. Ray Thunder Miller. Even seated, Ray had presence. Long gray hair pulled back into a loose ponytail, a thick, clean beard, black leather jacket faded and cracked with time. Tattoos covered his forearms, the sleeves pushed up like always. He didn't look amused, just in control. He leaned forward on the table, eyes locked on Chuck. Sharp. Calculating. "I don't think our friend here meant any harm," he said, then tilted his head. "Did you, cowboy?" Chuck took a breath, steadying him. Posture, tone, the way everyone in the room deferred to him. A leader. Chuck had seen his kind before, the ones who didn't need to prove anything because no one had challenged them in years. He lifted the cup again, took another sip, and said plainly, "No harm intended." Ray nodded slowly. Measured. "Man's just here for coffee," he said with a smirk, turning back to his crew. "Ain't that something?" A few chuckles followed. But the tension? It didn't break. Because Chuck knew, even as Ray leaned back, even as he waved his men off, this wasn't over. Men like Ray couldn't stand losing control of the room. And Chuck's calm? That was a threat. Ray wasn't done. He picked up his beer, took a slow sip, then sat back down with a heavy thud. "But you know," he said, voice shifting, colder now, "you see a man like you, someone who doesn't belong, and it makes you wonder." Chuck said nothing. Ray's smirk widened. "Makes you wonder why he thinks he can just walk into a place like this and not show respect." The word respect hung in the air, thick and heavy, not a request, but a challenge. One of the men behind Chuck let out a low chuckle. Chuck exhaled through his nose. He'd hoped this wouldn't turn into anything. But it always did, didn't it? He tapped the rim of his cup. Calm. Quiet. Measured. And without looking back, he spoke. "I don't start trouble." A flicker of something crossed Ray's face. Hard to read. But then the smirk dropped. His jaw tightened. And with slow, deliberate motion, he reached out and smacked Chuck's coffee cup clean off the bar. Ceramic shattered. Coffee spilled. Silence. Chuck stared at the mess for a long moment. Then lifted his gaze. Ray smiled. "Well now," he said softly. "What do you think about that?" cowboy?" Chuck didn't answer. He didn't have to, because he already knew how this was going to end. The air had shifted again. The casual swagger was gone. Now there was only the cold, sharp edge of expectation. Ray leaned back, enjoying it. This moment, the final pause before the chaos. Around him, his crew moved. Small shifts. Quiet tells. Hands resting too casually near belts. Feet planted wider. Predators sensing blood. But they weren't facing prey. Chuck Norris was not weak. He let out a slow breath like he was weighing his options. But the decision had already been made. Ray had made it for him the moment he knocked that cup off the bar. Chuck reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and placed them on the counter, a silent gesture for the coffee he never got to finish. For a second, it looked like he might just walk away. One of the younger rockers snorted. "Guess the old man knows better," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. That did it. A stool scraped. A figure shifted to Chuck's left, big, heavy-set. The first one to test him. He didn't swing. Not yet. Just shoved Chuck hard on the shoulder, daring him to move. Chuck didn't flinch. The rocker laughed. "Yeah, that's right." Second shove. Bigger mistake. Chuck's hand shot out like lightning, locking around the man's wrist. In one fluid motion, he twisted hard, sending the rocker stumbling forward. Chuck's knee came up fast, slammed into the man's ribs with bone-cracking force. The air flew out of him before he even processed what had happened. Chuck released him. He dropped, gasping. Out. The bar froze for a heartbeat. Then chaos. Another man charged, fist aimed at Chuck's head. Chuck ducked, sidestepped, brought an elbow up under the rocker's jaw, crack, sent him flying into a table, bottles crashing down around him. A third attacker rushed in with a broken pool cue. Chuck caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted, disarmed him. Same motion, a punch to the gut, a shove to the chest, and the man hit the floor, groaning. Now the whole bar was alive. Patrons scrambled, chairs toppled, the bartender wisely ducked behind the counter. Two more came at once, trying to overwhelm him. The first swung wide. Chuck blocked it, grabbed his arm, slammed a fist into his ribs. The second barely got close before Chuck's boot connected with his knee, a sharp crack, and he dropped, clutching his leg, howling. It was over in seconds. Bodies were sprawled across the floor, coughing, groaning, stunned. Chuck didn't say a word. Because sometimes, silence is louder than anything else. The others were done. Clutching their ribs, gasping for air, some rolling onto their backs just trying to breathe again. The whole fight had lasted maybe a handful of seconds, but it was enough. The rockers were broken. And yet, Chuck knew it wasn't over. Because Ray Thunder Miller was still seated. He hadn't moved. Hadn't thrown a single punch. Hadn't even flinched. He'd just watched, let his men go first. Let them test the stranger. Let them lose. Now, he finally leaned forward, resting both arms on the table, eyes fixed on Chuck. Chuck met his gaze. Ray exhaled slowly, shaking his head like he'd just watched something both ridiculous and impressive. "Well," he muttered, "looks like we got ourselves a real tough guy." Chuck didn't respond. Ray stood, rolling his shoulders with calm, practiced ease. He was broader than Chuck, taller too, and every inch of him looked like it had been through fights and come out on top. But there was no rush in him. No flailing bravado. Just calm control. He reached for a chair, flipped it around, set it upright again, like he had all the time in the world. Then, cracking his knuckles with a lazy grin, he stepped forward. "Let's see how tough you really are." This was the real fight. Ray didn't lunge. He didn't roar. He stood still, loosening his shoulders like a boxer about to enter the ring. He wasn't like the others, reckless and drunk on their own noise. No, Ray had been watching. studying, reading every movement Chuck made. And now he was ready to test him. The bar was silent. The only sounds came from the groans of the defeated, scattered across the floor. The handful of remaining patrons, truckers, locals, had pressed themselves against the walls, drinks forgotten, frozen in place. Chuck still hadn't moved. He didn't need to. He knew what was coming. Ray flexed his fingers, took one slow, heavy step forward. The sound of his boots against the floor echoed like thunder. His eyes never left Chuck's. Then, without warning, he struck. His fist came fast and heavy, arcing straight toward Chuck's jaw, faster than a man that size should have been able to move. But Chuck was ready. He tilted his head just enough, letting the punch slice past him, the wind from the blow brushing his cheek. Ray's momentum carried him forward, and Chuck countered in that exact split second. A palm strike to the chest. Sharp. Direct. Controlled. Ray staggered back a step, not down, but rattled. It was a message. A warning. Ray's smirk returned. "All right," he muttered. Then he charged. The bar exploded again. Ray swung hard. Chuck blocked, catching the man's wrist midair, locking it in a crushing grip. He twisted, trying to bend the joint, but Ray was strong, stronger than the others. He powered through, broke free with brute force, and immediately drove his knee up toward Chuck's ribs. Chuck twisted his body, absorbing the hit off angle. Pain flared, sharp, but manageable. Ray pressed the attack. Punch after punch. Heavy. Brutal. Relentless. Chuck dodged, sidestepped, redirected where he could. But Ray wasn't bluffing. He wasn't posturing. He was fighting like a man who'd spent his whole life throwing hands and taking the hits that came back. Somewhere behind them, a bottle shattered. A shout. The bartender yelled for them to take it outside. But it didn't matter. Not anymore. Ray feinted left, then set a vicious hook toward Chuck's ribs. Chuck blocked it with his forearm, then stepped in, snapping his own fist straight into Ray's gut. Solid. Heavy. Clean. Ray grunted and stumbled, but only for a moment. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and smiled. "Not bad," he said. Then he grabbed a bar stool. With one powerful swing, he sent it slicing through the air, aiming straight for Chuck's head. Chuck ducked, just barely avoiding it. Wham! The stool missed him by inches, crashing into a nearby table. Ray didn't pause. He twisted his grip and raised it high, swinging down in a brutal overhead smash. Chuck had no choice. He stepped back fast. The stool slammed into the floor with a thunderous crack, right where Chuck had just been. The stool shattered where Chuck had been standing a second ago, splinters flying across the bar. Ray tossed the broken legs aside like they were nothing. "Come on," he goaded. "Thought you were tough." Chuck didn't answer. Instead, he moved fast and precise. He closed the distance in a single breath. His foot snapped forward, straight into Ray's knee. The bigger man grunted, leg buckling. And before he could recover, punch to the ribs. Another to the jaw. Ray staggered. But he didn't fall. He growled, low and guttural, shaking his head like he was shaking off the fog. Then he lunged. Full weight. Full rage. He slammed Chuck back against the bar, bottles rattling behind them. But Chuck didn't panic. He used the bar as leverage. Elbow down, once. Twice, right into the back of Ray's neck. The grip loosened. Chuck spun, grabbed Ray by the collar of his jacket, and with a violent twist of his hips, he flipped Ray clean over the bar. Ray crashed down behind the counter, sending bottles, glasses, and curses flying. The bartender swore, but no one was listening. Chuck stepped back, breath steady, stance solid. Unshaken. But it wasn't over. Ray was still moving. The man groaned, pushed himself to his hands and knees. His chest rose and fell in heavy, uneven bursts. He looked up at Chuck, but the smirk was gone. Just bitterness now. "You should have just finished your coffee," Ray muttered. Then his hand moved. Fast. To his belt. Flash of steel. A knife. Chuck didn't blink. He moved before the blade even cleared Ray's hip. One step. One hand out, grip like steel. Wrist caught. Twist. Ray let out a snarl of pain. The knife jerked sideways. Too late to recover. Chuck struck. A clean jab to the throat. Not enough to crush, just enough to shock. Ray choked, his body locking up just long enough for the final blow. Chuck swept the legs. Ray hit the floor. Hard. The knife clattered across the wooden planks, spinning uselessly. And for the first time all night, Ray Thunder Miller didn't get up. He just lay there, staring up at the ceiling, chest heaving in shallow bursts. Beaten. The room was dead silent. The other rockers, those still conscious, sat frozen, looking between Chuck and their fallen leader, faces blank with disbelief. Chuck stepped back. Expression unreadable. Then he turned. Walked calmly back to the bar. Picked up the cash he'd laid down earlier. And placed it there again. "Get a new cup," he told the bartender. Then he sat. And took a sip. Like nothing had happened. The air was thick, full of the bitter scent of beer and sweat and the tension that still hadn't left the room. Only the occasional groan from the men on the floor broke the silence. Ray Thunder Miller was still there, breathing hard, body aching from the punishment. But that wasn't the wound that cut deepest. It was his pride. He'd ruled places like this for years. Walked into bars, took what he wanted, demanded respect. People knew his name. Knew his reputation. Few ever challenged it. Fewer ever survived it. But now he lay on the floor. And the man who put him there was calmly sipping coffee. Chuck hadn't gloated. Hadn't said a word. He'd just handled it, quietly, efficiently. Like it was routine. And that made it worse. Ray stared at the ceiling, fury and confusion swirling behind his eyes. He had underestimated this man. Thought he was just a passerby. A mistake. Now he knew better. Chuck Norris was something else, something Ray didn't understand, and maybe never would. Ray flexed his fingers against the floor, testing his limbs. Every part of him hurt, but he wasn't out cold. He could have let it end there. Could have stayed down. Could have accepted defeat. But men like Ray don't quit. With a slow, ragged breath, he rolled onto his side. And started to rise. Chuck didn't even turn. Just raised the fresh cup of coffee to his lips. Ray stood, tall, swaying slightly. His fingers clenched. Jaw tight. Strength hadn't worked. Experience hadn't worked. Now, all he had left was one final move. Ray twitched toward his belt. The bartender saw it first. Still frozen behind the counter, his mouth open to speak, but no words came. The gleam of the knife caught the dim light. Ray's grip was practiced. Confident. He wasn't the type to hesitate with a blade in his hand. He'd used one before. And he was ready to use it now. Chuck set his coffee cup down, slow and deliberate. Same way he'd moved since the moment he walked in. He didn't look surprised. He just looked disappointed. Ray lunged. The knife cut through the air, a flash of cold steel aimed to end it fast. But Chuck was already in motion. He shifted just enough, body flowing with the precision of a man who'd lived his entire life knowing how to respond to danger. His hand shot out, caught Ray's wrist. Twist. A sharp, surgical wrench. The blade hit the floor with a metallic clatter. Ray barely had time to react before the next strike landed. A jab to the throat. Controlled. Enough to stun, not kill. He staggered, choking. His balance faltered. Chuck didn't give him the chance to reset. Step in. Fist to the ribs. Another to the jaw. Every movement was clean, exact, purposeful. No wasted effort. No wild swings. Ray's body began to betray him. His knees buckled. His breath rasped in his lungs. He wanted to fight. His mind screamed it. But his body refused. Back to the floor. A heavy thud. Arms sprawled, chest heaving. It was over. And this time, Ray knew it. Chuck exhaled softly. Calm. Steady. His posture never once broke. The fight had lasted seconds, but that's all it ever needed to. The other rockers? Silent. Still. Whatever swagger they walked in with was gone. Their leader had just gone down. Twice. There was no coming back from that. Chuck looked at the bartender. "Coffee's good," he said. The bartender blinked, then gave a small nod. He was still clutching the counter like it was the only thing holding him upright. Chuck reached into his pocket, pulled out a few more bills, and set them gently next to his cup. For the damage. Then he turned and walked toward the door. No dramatic exit. No words of warning. Just the creak of wood beneath his boots. And then the door opened and shut behind him. The cool night air met him like an old friend. The smell of rain was heavier now. Thunder still rumbled low in the distance, but the storm hadn't broken yet. It was just waiting. Chuck stepped onto the porch of Big AL's roadhouse, his boots thudding quietly on the old wooden planks. The red glow of the neon sign above him flickered, casting long shadows over the gravel lot. His truck was right where he left it, silent, patient. For a moment, he just stood there, taking it in. The night. The quiet. The way things had played out exactly the way he knew they would. It was never a question of if he'd walk out, only how long it would take. He stepped down from the porch. Behind him, the bar was still. Inside, Ray Thundermiller lay on the floor. Still breathing. Still conscious. But for the first time, silent. The other rockers didn't move. Didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The bartender finally moved again. Wiped a shaky hand down his face. Then turned to survey the wreckage, shattered glass, overturned chairs, broken pride. He sighed, picked up the phone. Outside, Chuck reached his truck. Slid into the worn leather seat. Turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. The road stretched out in front of him, dark, empty, waiting. He didn't need a destination. He never did. Life had a way of putting him exactly where he needed to be. Right when he was needed most. As he shifted into gear, movement in the doorway caught his eye. Ray was standing. Barely. He leaned against the frame, unsteady, bathed in red neon light. Older now. Smaller somehow. All the weight of defeat in his eyes. The two men locked eyes. No anger. No challenge. Just understanding. Ray gave a slow, almost invisible nod. Chuck returned it. Then, he pressed the gas. The gravel crunched under the tires as he pulled away. The neon sign faded behind him. The storm still loomed above. But the road, as always, welcomed him back. And Chuck Norris kept moving forward.